Hi everybody, welcome to Awesome.js. Woo! It's good to see all of you here. Check 1, 2. It's really good to see all of you here. Just show of hands, how many of you all have been to Awesome.js before? Okay, cool. I've been out for a couple weeks, so it's good to be back here and really good to see all of you. Welcome. We got an exciting talk coming up. Before we get into that, we want to first off give a quick thanks to the folks that are hosting us. Thank you so much, Spreadfast. If you like the space or anything, you should talk to Victor, who's back there. You should talk to Victor.
Not like the space, though. It's not.
Yeah, or maybe not. Either way, talk to Victor because he's great. Also, what we have up here is our website, and it's got the code of conduct page. What this is, if you aren't familiar with codes of conduct, this is a formalization of our already great culture. The TLDR is to be excellent to each other, so if any of you see anything that falls short of that, please contact one of the organizers, and our contact information is up there as well. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Lon to talk more.
So tonight we have Cloudflare. Is this on? Y'all hear me? Okay, awesome. Cloudflare is sponsoring us, which is very exciting. We really appreciate it. And in the spirit of their mission of pushing content as close to possible, as close as possibly can to the user, they've actually just sent us slides and asked us to present them. So I'm going to act as the Edge host.
Fun facts while he's doing that, the Awesome.js site is actually fronted by Cloudflare. So if you've ever been to the Awesome.js
they do really great stuff.
Then like, wow, what a dope-ass content network. Then that's Cloudflare. So
all right.
Is that their new tagline you're going to sell?
It actually says that.
Dope-ass content network.
It actually says that right in here. A quick shout out to our sponsor today, Cloudflare, a dope-ass content network. Did you set that up ahead of time? Cloudflare runs 10% of the internet, providing performance and security to millions of websites. Over 7 million websites, APIs, and apps put Cloudflare in front of their servers to speed up performance, mitigate DDoS attacks, and improve web security. How does Cloudflare work? Cloudflare sits between your web server or origin server and the rest of the internet, serving your content cached from 139 plus data centers all over the world. Because of where we sit, we can also inject JS, HTML, and CSS directly into your web content, which enables the Cloudflare Apps platform. As a developer, you can build apps which can be installed by the millions of sites which rely on Cloudflare. You can even sell your apps. They can make you money every month. Visit cfl.re/apps to watch how you can build and deploy an app in less than 3 minutes.
That was beautiful.
One more slide, man. Bonus. App developers can collect up to $100K in Google Cloud Platform credits. Hey now. And to do that, you go to cfl.re/GCP offer.
real quick, I'm also, is this the end? Or is
This is the end, yeah.
One other Cloudflare plug. Does anybody listen to NPR here?
Never heard of it.
Okay, well, it's it's like Cloudflare pushes content to the edge. Marketplace, which is an NPR podcast, interviewed their CEO and had a really thoughtful take on the role of companies like Cloudflare in the internet, which a lot of us here work on. Who works on the internet here? Does anybody? Anyway, it's a thing. Maybe it's a thing. So yeah. Like they're a pretty cool company. And I don't say this about most Austin JavaScript sponsors.
So let's have a quick round of applause for Spreadfast and for Cloudflare.
If you're interested in sponsoring an event in the future and you want Lon to present a just wonderful marketing blurb along with a video, feel free to come talk to us after.
True. And also afterward, we're going to do, in order to actually get Cloudflare to pay for the beer and pizza, we have to take a group photo. Participation is optional, so if you prefer not to be photographed, then that's totally cool. But we'll do that after Adam gives his talk about higher order functions. Now, I don't know a whole lot about higher order functions. My understanding is that this has something to do with moving your functions higher up in your JavaScript file. I'm not sure how he's going to talk about this for 30 minutes, but I'm pretty confident that it's going to be great. So with that, Adam.
All right, can everyone hear me? Is this mic working okay? Yeah? All right, awesome. So, good evening, everybody. Yeah, my name's Adam Giese, and higher order functions just part of what I'm going to be talking about today. Overall, I'm going to be talking about filtering arrays. So, show of hands, who here likes going out to eat? Yeah, most people. Who here likes deciding a place to go out to eat with a large group of people? It's not always fun between juggling budgets, preferences, dietary restrictions. It can be a lot that you have to juggle. Here's an example API response that you might get from like a Yelp API or Google Places. It's an array of objects that has like a name, a rating, a price, and a cuisine. It's just a sample, but if you take, for example, here, let's say we take all the restaurants within a 1 mile radius of here. This is going to be a pretty long array. If you're trying to look for a place to eat and you want it to be within a good price range, you want it to serve what you want to eat, and you want it to preferably taste good, that's a lot of filtering. So before I jump too much into the filtering, I'm going to do a quick overview of some of the ES6 notation that you may or may not be familiar with. I heard this tip for talking to assume that your audience is very, very smart and knows nothing. So I'm going to assume that I'm not going to assume that you know these ES6 stuff. So I'll cover it very briefly. So an arrow function with no parameters, just the parentheses, then the arrow, and then the function body. If you have one argument, then the parentheses are optional. Here's where it may not look completely what you're used to. An implicit return, if you don't have the curly brackets, then the statement will be the return value of that function. So these two functions, the implicit and the explicit, will return the same thing. The implicit is just a little bit more concise. This one, object destructuring, is useful if you want to unpack values from an object into a distinct variable, which I got that quote from MDN. It's useful for, in this case, we don't care about the whole foo object, we just care about the bar value. So these two, likewise, will return the same thing. And then the gather and spread operators for arrays. If you do ... args, it will take all of the arguments that you pass into that function and put them into an array named args. And in this case, for the spread example, the ... will, if you do it on an array, it will spread that array into its multiple values. So that's just a quick overview. So now let's dive a little bit into the array filtering. So for the building block of a filter is a predicate. So a predicate is just a function that returns a Boolean. In this case, isString is a function that takes an argument, and then it compares. We've got the implicit return. It returns if the type of the argument is equal to string. So isString foo is true. IsString 1 is false. All right. What does this have to do with filtering restaurants? Well, here's maybe a better example. Is pizza cuisine? Is pizza will destructure cuisine from the restaurant that you pass in, and will compare it to pizza. So we've got the constant of P. Terry's is an object with a cuisine of burgers. A constant of via 3 and 3 with a cuisine of pizza. P. Terry's is not pizza. But via 3 and 3 is pizza. Now we get into higher order functions. So a higher order function is a function that accepts or returns another function. So in this case, we've got multiply. which you might notice that there are 2 arrows on the multiply. So multiply is a function that accepts one parameter, and it returns a function that accepts another parameter, and that second function will return the product of A and B. So what that allows you to do is create new functions on the fly, like const double equals multiply 2, const triple equals multiply 3. Both of those are new functions created by the multiply higher order function. So we can double 3 to get 6, or triple 3 to get 9. So that's a simple example of a fairly powerful technique that can be used. Here's another example of a higher order function. We've got negate. Now, negate is a higher order function that accepts a predicate and returns the flipped value of that predicate's Boolean return, which is a very large mouthful. But when you break it down, it's really not, there's not too much going on. All you do is you pass negate a predicate, so it could be is string, it could be, in this case, is pizza, and it returns another function that will just return the exact opposite of what that one would have. So we've got is not pizza. If we pass P. Terry's into is not pizza, you'd get a true. If you'd pass East Side Pies, for example, you'd get a false. So, do we have any questions so far? Awesome. Means I'm explaining things great or terribly. We've got, here we've got some comparisons. Is above, is below, is equal. You may be asking, what's the point of turning these comparisons into functions? They're pretty straightforward. A is greater than B is less typing than is above, so it's not more concise. Well, the reason that you might want to is so you can use them in higher order functions. Here we've got does value compare is a higher order function that accepts a key, it accepts a comparison, and it accepts a value that you want to compare to, a comparison value. So if we want to dynamically generate some of these predicates, we can pass them to this higher order function, does value compare. So is cheap, does value compare price is below or equal to 2. Or is good, does value compare rating is above or equal 3. You may notice that most of the predicates start with is, just as the name. That's, I find it to be a good practice because it signals to the reader of your code that it's a predicate, and it also helps in situations like this. It really does make it more readable. Price is below or equal to is a fairly understandable piece of code. Or const is burger, does value compare cuisine is equal burger, or pizza. Does that make sense? We're doing good? All right, so the promised topic, array.filter. So array, the filter is a method that is built into JavaScript on the array prototype. It accepts a predicate, and that predicate receives the parameters of the element for each element in the array, the index of that element in the array, and then a full copy of the array. I find 90 to 95% of the time you really just care about the element, but sometimes you might want the context. And then that higher order function, the filter higher order function, will return a subset of the original array if that predicate returns a true or a truthy value. So here we have the is even predicate, and then we've got a range of numbers between 1 and 9. And we pass the is even predicate to the filter, and it returns the numbers 2, 4, 6, and 8, because those pass the is even predicate. If we take that restaurants array that we have of the hundreds of restaurants within a 2-mile radius of here, and then we filter is pizza, we're only going to get the restaurants where the cuisine is equal to the string pizza. All right, that's great if you just care about what you're eating or if you just care about price. And you can chain these together to filter multiple times, or you can combine your predicates into a combo predicate. So we've got a both function or an either function that each accept two predicates and will return a new predicate for if they're both true or if either of them are true in the either case. So with this, we can do both is cheap and is burger for a combo predicate is cheap burger. This is great, but it's not exactly scalable. So rather than just having a both and either, we're going to use some other array methods that we have, array.every and array.sum. Both are higher order functions that accept a predicate. Both are predicates. Array.every will return true if all elements in the array pass, and the array.sum returns true if any elements in the array pass. So we've got the predicate is odd. 1, 2, 3, 4, every is odd will return false. 1, 3, 5, 7, every is odd will return true. And likewise, 1, 2, 3, 4, sum is odd, true. 2, 4, 6, 8, sum is odd, false. So every and sum are useful for dealing with an array that you want to apply a predicate to, or dealing with an array of predicates. So here we can wrap that the array.every and array.sum into is every, is any higher order functions. So is every and is any look fairly similar, as you'd expect. Both accept an array of predicates, and then will return a predicate to see if all of those predicates pass with the given value. So is valid cuisine, is any, and then you pass in array of predicates. Is burger, is pizza, is taco. In this case, is valid cuisine is its own predicate. If you pass it P-Terry's, it'll pass. If you pass it Torchy's Tacos, it'll pass. If you pass it Mad Greens, it won't pass because it's salad. Is valid restaurant will combine to see if all of those pass, not if any of them pass, if all of them pass. So we pass it is valid cuisine, this combo predicate that we have up here, is cheap and is good. Because I want a burger or pizza or tacos. I'm not that picky, but I don't want salad. And I want it to be cheap because I'm on a budget, and I want it to be good because if I'm going out to eat, why waste it on a bad meal? So we pass this combo predicate into the restaurants.filter, and we'll get anything. We'll get any restaurant that matches those filters. Any questions?
Did you recently build a restaurant website?
I did not. I'm just hungry a lot.
Can you go back one second? Just so I'm tracking. So restaurants gets passed by a filter into invalid is valid restaurant, and is valid restaurant passes restaurants to every single predicate, or
So.
it just gets passed around, restaurants gets passed around as like an argument?
So the restaurants array here will go, will pass each individual restaurant into the is valid restaurant predicate. And then that predicate will check to see if is valid cuisine, which will check if it's any of the is burger, is pizza, is tacos. So to write that by hand would be, the three levels deep, but if you kind of do it a little bit at a time, then it's can be a little bit less unruly, especially if you have the variable's name to make it more readable. Yeah. So each individual restaurant is passed as a predicate into is valid restaurant. So the is every here The restaurant would be the value here.
Okay.
For some, if does it call all the elements in the array, or does it stop as soon as it gets a true?
I believe it stops as soon as it gets a true, and every likewise will stop as soon as it gets a false. I would double check that, but I believe that as soon as it knows that it's smart enough to stop. And it may be implementation specific as well. But ideally, you wouldn't have any side effects in these predicates, and they should, unless you have a very, very large number, the performance should theoretically be small enough, but yeah. Yes?
Does predicates just relate to anything like with carrying and stuff like that?
So the term itself, predicate?
No, like how it is, all the function definitions are, does it have any relation with carrying?
So some of these examples that I have are, let me find an example. Some of them, like this one, for example, is a curried function. It doesn't necessarily have to be curried. If anyone's not familiar with the term, like a curried function, it means it's kind of like this one where it accepts each argument one at a time. And so every single function, or like multiply here, is a curried function because it accepts A and B separately. So these predicates that I've written, a lot of them are curried just because that's how I tend to write, but they don't necessarily have to be. As long as they accept the value, as long as the first argument is the element in the array, so in this case, it is expecting the value to be the restaurant, it will work. Yeah.
But that is a really good question because it's definitely like absolutely related to currying, and in general, currying is kind of like feels a little bit weird in JavaScript, right? Because it's like if like a curried function that takes two arguments instead of like add a comma b, you would have to call add a parentheses parentheses second argument. So it's like like doing this in JavaScript a lot of times, the currying a lot of functions, it's absolutely related. The downside is a lot of times it's got like two drawbacks, which one, usually you want to like add a library in on it, like I think Woo.js, or there was another one called like Fantasyland.
You're just making these up.
No, it's real. So, and then the other downside is like performance, right? So you can imagine like it takes a pretty smart JavaScript compiler. If what you're doing is like accepting an argument, returning a function that like accepts another argument, and then evaluating it, it's much harder to optimize that with like a JIT compiler than it is to just take two arguments and run the computation. So those are usually the two reasons why like currying is a little bit harder in JavaScript than like some other environments and stuff.
What other kind of languages might be easier?
Anybody use Reason ML?
Or Elm?
Elm?
Haskell.
What about Haskell weirdos? Users, programmers, we got into those.
On the performance front, there's a really good talk from John David Dalton, the Lodash guy, about how to make this sort of thing fast. And so what Lodash does is, under the covers, they call into a small core of functions where they don't do this sort of thing. They like pass all the arguments through, and that allows the JIT compiler to turn that hot function into nice fast code. I'm not explaining this very well, but there's a really good talk from like 2014 from JDD.
And it's related to why like the Lodash source code is a nightmare to try to read
Oh
through,
yeah.
as opposed to like the underscore source code, which is much more readable, but like way less performant. So it's like one of those trade-offs.
Here's an example of like does value compare being curried and what that would look like when you call it. So if you have is cheap, does value compare, price is below or equal to, we got this set of parentheses, and Whereas in some of those languages where they're auto-currying, then you don't have to worry about using this implementation or this implementation. Then there's library Ramda, which has all of its functions can be called. You can call them as a curried function, but I think you can call each parameter. You can pass the parameters together as well, but they have some logic on their end to make that possible.
Isn't that's called partial application? Is that right?
Yeah. So
like,
I guess currying, would be a form of partial application. I believe. Currying will always each step of the function will always have one. Partial application doesn't necessarily have to. So this original does value compare would be considered partial application, and this one would also be considered partial application, but only this one is curried. I believe. If I'm not a functional programming wizard, so if someone here is, definitely correct me if I'm wrong.
So I have one more question. So that filter method, restaurants.filter, that's cool. Yeah, filter and every and some. That's cool how they work on arrays. Is there equivalents for things that aren't necessarily arrays, like maybe just if you wanted to iterate over all the DOM elements or something like that, or maybe iterate over clicks, like button clicks or something like that? Are there similar sort of methods available?
Yeah, I'm honestly not sure if it works on array-like elements like DOM elements. I'm not sure on that.
What's browser and/or node support for filter every sum, and then or do you transpile it? And then if you do that, what does that look like?
So I would also double check this, but I believe filter, every, and some are all ES5 features. So pretty good browser support. Now a lot of these ES6 features, like the arrow functions, the implicit returns, the spread gather operators, won't necessarily have as good support because they're ES6 features. Awesome.
All right, let's give a round of applause. So I think what we'll do is we'll take a quick break, go to the restroom or grab another drink if that's what you like, or some more pizza. And then we've got a little bit of time left, and so we'll do just a general, sorry Andy, here I come. Here I am, just a general discussion of recent web events, that sort of thing. Yeah, web events, which is not an API. Well, it is an API, but that's not what I mean.
Events or just events?
Excuse me, sir, if you want to speak, you need a microphone. And so let's come back in 5, and then after that discussion, we'll do the picture for those who wish to participate, and then we're going to go down to Lavaca Street Bar if anybody wants to hang out after that. All right? So another round of applause for Adam. Thank you so much.
We have puppies.
All right, y'all, let's bring it back together. So what we're going to do is, if anybody has any more questions for Adam about his talk, then please fire away. And otherwise, if you have announcements about open source stuff that you're working on, or questions, if there's I've actually got one, which I want to see if anybody has encountered before. But before we do that, any questions for Adam? No? No?
You can talk about JSConf as well.
I could talk about JSConf. I went to JSConf. It was pretty big. It was, yeah. What's up?
I've got one Adam-related thing before we get into JSConf, because I do want to hear about that. Has anybody used much of the iterator protocol? Yeah. So, is anybody familiar with this iterator protocol? Has anybody written much Java or C++ or Python? Okay, they've got this thing called an iterator protocol. JavaScript did a similar thing, which allows you to do cool stuff like take common concepts like filter, map, and reduce, and then apply them to collections other than just arrays. So you could write the one function that does filtering or reduction or something like that, and apply that to like a set of DOM elements, or something like weirder like an infinite stream of clicks, or I don't know, Fibonacci numbers if you're in like an interview or something like that.
Did you just try to convince us to use RxJS?
It always comes back to that. You'll notice a pattern. You'll notice it always comes back.
I was going to ask if you had a prescription for what we should
So it is pretty cool, but it is unfortunately for some reason like a lot of this stuff. I don't know of any standards that like do any of this stuff. So if anybody's into like shilling standards or anything like that.
Also, they're introducing what async iterators too, right?
Yeah, async iterators. So async iterators use generators, which are iterator, like very similar to iterators, but they add an extra feature of like actually pausing the execution stack and like saving that off and everything like that. So it's very closely related to that, which is, to your point, how we get really nice APIs like async iterators, which is used in like Koa, if you use that for any nice async stuff or anything. So yeah, it's really cool stuff. It's really useful and actually worth hacking on. So anyway, I accept bribes from the iterator protocol lobby, so that's my plug for them.
Big iterator.
Yeah, big iterator has got their claws sunk deep into me. So
That's a new Twitter handle, right?
yeah.
So I'll kick off the general discussion. We ran into some weirdness with peer dependencies and NPM 5 plus, or I guess it's 3 something plus, flattening of dependencies. So it used to be like an old NPM, if you install, everything gets its own copy of everything. So there's like, if like my library and his library both use request, we would each have our own copy of request, which can lead to some weirdness. And so they introduced this idea of flattening. So if my request and his request have compatible version ranges, then there'll just be one request, and everybody shares it. If they have incompatible version ranges, then there'll be one at the top, and then he'll have his own. And we ran into a thing where we had a library called request promise that says it's a peer dependency of request. And NPM, as far as I can tell, actually like hoisted request promise to the top, to like the shallowest node modules. So it flattened request promise, but it didn't flatten request. And so when request promise tried to require it, then it was like, nope, it ain't here. Has anybody else run into this? This is a very obscure problem.
I'm just trying to avoid peer dependencies.
Well, this is like other people's peer dependencies. It's like even worse. So, all right, well.
Maybe I'm in a different peer group.
Are you not depending on requests directly? Oh, there's multiple copies of requests, so they got pushed out.
So it is the package in question did not depend on either request or request promise.
Okay.
It depended on things that depended on it.
Oh, okay.
So like the package in question is not at fault.
Okay.
Anyway, I think it's an NPM bug. I was just curious if anybody had seen it. Could save me the embarrassment.
happen with
closing. What?
Did it happen with Yarn?
Ooh, I haven't tried it with Yarn. It's like a...
It'd be an interesting thing to unravel. Any other questions?
Questions? Anybody got any questions? Yeah, Andy.
Yeah, is anybody working with Safari 12's intelligent tracking prevention that just rolled out last night? For those who haven't heard of it, Apple has released a big new revision to their privacy tracker blocking system that uses some heuristics and machine learning to decide what domains are tracking you in particular ways, and will limit their scripts from those domains access to cookies in a third-party context. So this is a shot across the bow to like Facebook, Google, Twitter, those sites who want to like snoop on you. So if your company relies on that kind of thing, you're probably going to see a dip in your numbers starting today on desktop and mobile Safari.
Well, let's be fair, on mobile Safari.
Yeah, right. If you have any numbers on desktop Safari,
If you have any numbers on desktop Safari, check your analytics because that's really a mistake. So is it? It should affect basically any user, so most any analytics provider, right? Like if you have a site that uses an analytics provider.
if they want to inspect cookies under their own domain authority, when they're running on your site, they will not be able to see those cookies soon.
Okay.
Oh, I see.
So then.
If I give Google Analytics the tracking key that I want it to use, then everything's fine. It's if Google Analytics wants to track across multiple sites.
That's correct. There's also kind of a side feature that has to do with sites that rapidly redirect you with 300 codes through a bunch of domains and set cookies server side. Those domains will also get flagged as tracking domains. And once you're flagged, that's it.
So like a service like HubSpot would be like a dead end when it hits.
Possibly. I mean, I don't know how HubSpot works
It
necessarily.
just tracks you all over the web.
Yeah, so that's the interest is in increasing users' privacy, which Apple I think rightly believes that people want. Firefox is doing a different kind of privacy play using a remote blacklist. But what's interesting is that ITP is in the WebKit source repository. So this could get into Chrome if Google cared about your privacy.
I was going to say they're running interventions on privacy. Meanwhile, Google is running interventions to prevent your JavaScript from loading on slow connections so that they can load advertisements.
Yeah, we should talk about no scripts too, if anybody's getting prepared for that.
Yeah.
So for those who haven't heard of that, there's a possible feature in Android Chrome that when they detect you're on a certain speed of connection, they'll just not execute JavaScript.
Resident Android expert, go.
It's true, man. It's a true story.
Yeah.
Next evolution of
You
browser
don't have any,
wars.
you don't have any scripted remarks on this?
So
I'm curious though, how's it going to work with JavaScript-based sites like React sites and things like that,
So they said you can flip on, I think it's on Chrome flags, you can turn on the setting early. Like it's basically like Chrome is going to, at a certain point, if you're trying to load JavaScript, I think if it's over a certain size, or it may not be, but if you're on a certain speed connection, they're just going to not load external scripts. You can emulate that now by flipping a setting in Chrome flags that kind of like says, let's pretend I'm on 2G. They're going to give a UX similar to, remember back in like IE8 mode, where like IE8 lands, where like you had that thing in the address bar where it was like, if you were running in like Quirks mode and you needed to go to compatibility mode or vice versa, you would hit that button and it would do a full page refresh. That's basically what they're offering is, there'll be a thing, you can click it, and it'll reload the whole page. And we should all push back pretty hard so they stop trying to police the internet.
Does anybody know if that affects service workers? Seems like that would be a huge miss if they did stop service workers. But
Hope not. That's a good question. Should ask Alex Russell. Wait for a tweet storm.
Would service worker have to be installed already?
if it's going to execute locally, yeah.
But your connection could be good and get your service worker installed, and you come back and your connection is bad.
I mean, service workers will still execute if they detect you're offline. But what happens in this like sort of weird slow mode?
Does having a service worker opt you out of this entirely, right?
Or can you not get your service worker loaded because it's a JavaScript file, and
Yeah,
That's okay.
Oh,
It
okay,
seems
okay.
surprising if they blocked execution of JavaScript as opposed to like fetching of JavaScript, because if it's a slow connection.
it's fetching.
So in that case, service
Oh,
workers
it's been
would be
loaded.
a really good way to not get hit by that.
Sure, except if you're like, well, I mean, unless you're hitting the site, like if it's like your first visit, so you go to load like
Yeah.
SWJS or whatever you call it, then you can't get it in. But,
Mhm.
Fun times ahead.
More questions, announcements, weird web stuff?
Has anybody done anything cool with, speaking of adding more JavaScript to your website, anybody done anything cool with like CSS worklets or anything like that? Some cool layouts or effects or anything?
Is this the Houdini stuff?
Yeah, the Houdini stuff where you can like define your own CSS properties in JavaScript and then run off the main thread so they don't block rendering, but they can still get blocked by the network.
No, it seems cool.
It's supposed to be like our first opportunity to have a decent solution for polyfilling future CSS specs.
Mm-hmm.
Because before you had to like scrape every style declaration on the page
Yeah.
and go rewrite them every time.
Or doing layout off thread.
Oh, right.
Another big thing.
There's a cool proposed API that Chrome is committed to implementing, which is display locking. So if you have a subtree of the DOM that you're going to do a bunch of stuff to, so like maybe you have a table of like log entries and you're going to sort it, and so you're going to move a bunch of those rows around. This allows you to lock the table itself, do all of the work. The browser will not redraw it, and then you commit it, and then it just does the reflow once.
So it's like you're bashing up operations without needing an intermediary step to
Yep.
prevent the browser from knowing about them.
Exactly.
This feature brought to you by React.js.
What's that?
This web platform feature brought to you by React.js.
Yes. So,
I learned a cool tip this week from Twitter. How many people here have used like the gutter breakpoints in Chrome DevTools? You click on the gutter in a JavaScript file and it sets a breakpoint. Yay, nay. I just want to make sure how much I need to explain. Because I don't want anyone to miss it because it's useful. So it's pretty frequent for me that I'll go to like a client's production website or something like that. And there's like a hot loop that's being hit like 1,000 times. And I want to see the values over time, but I can't edit the code. And I don't want to set a breakpoint and just constantly hit play. So there's a feature in the Chrome DevTools called a conditional breakpoint, where instead of clicking on the gutter, you can right-click and it accepts any expression. If it evaluates to true, it'll trigger a breakpoint. If not, it'll just skip. So I saw on Twitter someone had the really smart idea of using a conditional breakpoint to stick in a console log because it has access to all the current scope that's right there. And console log always returns false. But you could technically invoke any code there, like pushing things to an array, and you can just add the void keyword that we never use in front of it to make sure that a falsy value comes back. And that way you can inject all sorts of like random diagnostic stuff you're doing for debugging on like a production store without having to like set up something to rewrite the request from the JavaScript file to your local machine, which is my normal painful method.
that's cool.
Do you know the handle of the person who came up with that?
Oh.
Did you retweet it?
I mean, now that Twitter's getting chronological timelines back, I might be able to find it if I go back a week.
Yeah, it's been more than like 3 hours, so probably not.
It's been like 3 weeks.
What is your
so-
Twitter handle?
Drew ML, but it's just trash.
Not just your peak at all.
It's just my brand.
So another cool thing is if, like in that scenario where you're like, I can't do anything, or you know, it's somebody else's code and you can't modify it or whatever, but you're like, who is calling this method or something? You can set a conditional breakpoint at the first script tag that you see. To anybody do like monkey patching? You know what this is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So monkey patching is this thing where you swap out a property, like I don't know, window.add event listener or something like that. And you can swap out your own method for that and then call the underlying one. So if you're like, oh man, who's adding an on-scroll listener, you can swap that out with a conditional breakpoint in somebody else's code at the top of the file,
and then find the offender.
I never thought using a conditional for that. I always like put a breakpoint on the first line, and then every single
Oh,
page load when
yeah,
it
yeah.
happens, go in the console history.
Yeah.
That seems a lot less painful.
That's nice. That's nice.
Huh. Can't you also, like, I mean, granted, you would need, like, the function would need to be exposed in the global namespace, but isn't there, like, in Chrome debug, like, you can type, like, debug and then pass it a function, right? And I think it'll break when that function's invoked.
Oh, that's right.
I've never heard of this passing.
I don't know about this
Wait,
at all.
so I know that the debugger
So,
is like keyword, you can hit a breakpoint. So this is like,
So there's, you can just go in the console and just type debug, and then invoke that as a function and pass a function into it.
okay.
And whenever the function that you pass to it is invoked, it'll hit a breakpoint at the top
That's
of that function.
amazing.
Huh.
That's really neat. That's cool. Cool tricks. Everyone.
You also,
Let's just keep this trend going.
yeah, let's start with maybe we can get Paul Irish to respond to the next one. So you can now edit the website for another origin, and when you refresh, your edits can continue to be applied. So if you want to do your thing, you can like actually, you can, you know, like let's say you want to be able to do, you want to intercept some stuff, do some monkey patching, whatever. You can take the index HTML for like magento.com, stick your like script tag at the top, and then as long as you have the DevTools open, Chrome will use your modified version of index.html instead of whatever index.html was supposed to be.
They still have some fun developer experience stuff to fix there though, because like by default, DevTools now, as of a recent version, auto formats like minified JavaScript, and you can't make those changes and have them persist in that mode. So you have to like dig through the settings, turn off that setting, copy the file, format it in your editor, make the change, minify. Yeah,
That's annoying. Well, anyway, it's kind of cool. Also, you can now set a breakpoint later on in the line. Has there anybody tried this thing? This is amazing.
That's neat.
So like if you have like one line where there's like 6 nested function calls, you used to have to like step in and step back out, and step in and step back out, and step in and step back out until you get to the one you actually care about. Now, when you click on that, what do you call it, a gutter to the left-hand side? You set your breakpoint, it'll actually show at each possible place where it could break, there'll be a little like triangle thingy, and you can select one of those, and instead of breaking at the line, it'll break on that function call arbitrarily deep into it, which
So you don't have to like
chill.
reformat your code to set a breakpoint in a callback or something like
Yes.
that.
All right, with that, I think we're done with Chrome Dev trivia. They want more, they're gonna have to pay us.
Safari Inspector.
Oh yeah. There's a Firefox one. So I think they released like their first initial support for rewind. So like right now in Chrome DevTools you can step back through the stack and you can inspect values, but those values are what they are on your current stack frame, not the one that you stepped back to. I think Firefox now actually captures the state of everything at each step in the call stack. How they're doing that without just using every bit of memory, no idea. But that's them and Chakra from Microsoft both have like working implementations of. So like if you write some code and it calls a function and does something wrong, in the debugger you can just step back 2 steps, change the data, let it run again, and just keep doing that, which is pretty game-changing.
Awesome. All right.
Photo time.
Yeah, so those who wish to participate, we're going to take a group photo real quick, and then we're going to pack up all the chairs and stack them in the back. And then for those who want to hang out and talk about more exciting Chrome DevTools trivia or anything else, we're going to walk this way and then up Lavaca to the Lavaca Street Bar. It's about 2 blocks away.
Are we going to pour one out for once, Ginger Man?
We already poured one out for Ginger Man. Ginger Man's gone.
Somebody will
We can
probably
keep doing it.
Yeah. All right. So another round of applause for our sponsors. And